Hi everyone, this is Heather. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I've got a card tutorial for you and we're going to be making this fun jungle birthday card. I wanted to make a card that had a lot of dimensional look to it, where the images really stood out and the background kind of receded without having to actually add a ton of real layers. So in order to do that, I created a background and a frame that had a lot more subtle colors than the images that I wanted to focus on. I'm using stamps from Hello Bluebird, and this is from their latest release. This is More Jungle Littles, and it's got the most adorable little jungle animals on it. And if you would like to check out my channel, I have a card made with the elephant. Today we're going to be using the rhino and the little toucan and some of the leaves. Also from Hello Bluebird, I'm going to be using the Happy Bird Day stamp set. I thought that went really well with the little rhino all surrounded by birds, and this is from their Garden Friends stamp set. I'm also using one of their gallery frame dies, a grass die from Honeybee, and a small little stitched rectangle die from Stampin' Up. I'm using kraft cardstock as my card base, just an 8.5 by 11 sheet cut scored folded in half. I have some green for die cutting my frame. Another piece of kraft cardstock that's cut to about 3.5 by 5. I just want to make sure that it's going to fit behind the frame. A small piece for embossing in the green, and 110-pound weight cardstock for my stamping. I'm going to start by stamping my background on the kraft sheet of cardstock, and in order to help those images kind of recede, I'm going to be stamping them in green instead of black so they're not quite so bold. So just randomly placed 3 of the leaves from the stamp set on a block, and I'm using Pear Pizzazz ink from Hero Arts on just a scrap piece of paper. And I'm just going to randomly stamp these leaves all over the kraft cardstock. I'm just going to turn it and just sort of place those all around, having some of them go off the edges. I finished stamping out my background and I've moved on to black Memento ink. And on my white cardstock, I have stamped the rhino and the toucan 3 times. I've cleaned off the leaves. I'm going to stamp them on there as well. For my coloring today, I'm going to be using Prismacolor pencils. I've got 3 shades of green, lime, green ochre, and this really dark green. I accidentally sharpened my pencil on the wrong side, and I sharpened off the name, so unfortunately it's not on there. So I'm going to pick a style of leaf and color each one of those the same. So on this one that sort of looks a little bit like a feather, I'm using this really dark green and coloring all of those in. Then with yellow ochre, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow just to kind of give it a little bit more of a realistic look. And I've just added that yellow on one side. I'm going to pick another leaf, and with this green ochre, I'm just going to color in my leaves kind of close to the stem with the green. Go back in with the same yellow ochre and just color the tips in the yellow. The 3rd leaf is going to get lime on one side and yellow ochre on the other. So I'm just going to continue coloring and just color all of these leaves in the background the exact same. I finished coloring my background. I'm going to set that aside for now, and I moved on to the white cardstock, and using the exact same color combination, I've colored in the leaves on the white cardstock. For my images, I wanted to be able to blend and soften the colored pencils a little bit better, so I'm using an alcohol ink blending pen. This is from Ranger and Tim Holtz, and instead of alcohol ink solution, I have filled this with odorless mineral spirit, which works really great with colored pencils. So for my rhino, I'm going to start out with Putty Beige, and I'm going to completely color in the rhino with this color, except for the inside of his ears and his horn. I'm going to take the blender pen and I'm just going to smooth out that color. So I like to work in small circular motions and just blend that out so that it's smooth. With that lighter color blended out, I'm going in with cool gray, and I'm going to go around and add some shading and shadowing. I'm not using a lot of pressure. These pencils have a high wax content to them, so they blend really easily. You don't need to, bear down very hard. So just going around and adding in some of that darker color. So I'm kind of thinking that my light source is coming from the upper right hand corner, so I've added a little bit more of the darker color on the left hand side. I go back in with my blender pen, and again, in just soft swirling motions, I'm going to begin to soften up that color and pull it out a little bit towards that lighter color. So I hope you can see how that really starts to soften and blend together. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue to kind of pull this color out and blend it in. If you need to go back in and add more of a darker color anywhere, it's really easy to do. You don't need to like sit and wait for it to dry. You can just go back in, add a little bit more of the darker color, and you can really build and blend this up as much as you would like. So I'm going to go ahead and finish blending out my rhino. With my gray blended out, I'm going into a peach color, and I want to give him just a little bit of a cheek and some color along the inside of the ear. Again, I'm not coloring in the complete area. I'm just adding the pencil where I would like it to be a little bit darker. On the ears, the cheek, and around the horn. I'm going to go in and add just a little bit more of that light gray on the horn. I'm going to go back to my blender and just blend all those peach colors in. Now that I've finished coloring out my rhino, one thing that I wanted to point out that's really important, before you change colors, grab your scratch piece of paper and just kind of scribble your pen to clear that off and until the ink starts to come out clear again. That way you're not transferring any color, especially if you're going from a lighter color to a darker color. I'm going to color all my toucans in the same. I'm going back to that peach and adding in one of the stripes on his nose. I'm using that same yellow ochre for his face section and another one of the stripes. I'm using vermilion for another stripe. And before I move on to that darker color for the body, I'm going to go ahead and soften these out. I'm really not blending them in together too much. I just want to smooth that pencil out. I've cleaned off the tip of my marker, and I'm going back to the cool gray color that I used for my rhino. I'm going to completely color in the body and the tip of the nose of my little toucan. And so similar to what I did with the rhino, I'm going to smooth out that lighter gray color. I'm going to use black and add in some shading and shadowing. And again, with the blender pen and nice little circular motions, I'm going to blend those colors in together. So I'm going to color all of my toucans this exact same way. With my colored pencil blending all done, I wanted to add a little bit more shine and detail to my images. So with my white Signaball gel pen, I'm just going to go in and add a few highlights here and there. And now I'm ready to die cut all my images, so I'm using the coordinating dies. I'm going to take a little bit of repositional tape. I'm going to tape the dies to all of these and run them through my die cut machine. I'm also going to grab my green piece of cardstock and die cut my gallery frame as well. I've got all my little images die cut, and from the frame I'm just going to keep the stitched outer frame section and the long piece that's been cut away. On that long rectangle piece, I'm going to take my grass die and kind of towards the top, I'm going to use my repositionable tape and tape that in place and run that through my die cut machine. And now when I take this apart, I actually have two sections that I can use layered on top of each other. So I'm grabbing my scratch piece of paper again. I've got a blending brush and I'm going back to that Pear Pizzazz ink that I stamped my background with. And just in kind of soft swirling motions, just want to add a little bit more texture to the top of that grass. It just adds a nice extra dimension. I'm going to do that on both of these. On the back of this shorter piece, I'm just going to run some tape runner along the bottom and adhere that to the other piece so I have that nice layer. I've pulled my frame over and I want this to be able to sit nicely inside. So I'm just laying that across the bottom and I'm going to make a little tick mark here and here. And you can use your scissors or your paper trimmer, and I'm just going to trim that excess away. For my sentiment, I've grabbed my Versamark ink pad and the words, and on an extra piece of the same color of green, I'm going to stamp out the Happy Birthday. I'm going to bring my embossing tray over and pour on white detailed embossing powder, tap off the excess. I'm going to heat this with my heat gun. With my sentiment embossed, I'm going to take my small little stitched rectangle die and I'm kind of bump it up to the left side of my sentiment. I'm going to tape that in place and again run this through my die cutting machine. I'm going to take my scissors and just snip a little bit at that end off. I'm ready to begin assembling my card. So I'm just going to place my stamped leaf panel behind my frame, just kind of get it where I would like it, turn it over, and I'm just going to take a little bit of Scotch tape and just tape that in place all along the edges. On the back of that panel, I've also placed some foam squares, and I'm just going to center that on my cardstock base. Using the tape runner, I'm going to tape my grass down at the bottom. Also with regular tape runner, I'm going to apply my sentiment. I'm just going to kind of slip it underneath that frame. And I'm also going to slip my little rhino in between those little sections of grass. I'm going to put him off kind of to the right just a little bit. On the rest of my images, I've also placed foam squares, and I'm just going to build up my scene. I'm going to place one on his head, one kind of down here to the left, one little toucan up on the sentiment. And then I'm just going to add my little leaves falling around on my background. And here is our finished card. I think this is a really fun way to add a lot of depth and dimension by having a subtle background in like a more muted tone, and then having your images be stamped on white with black ink to really kind of help pop them up. I just thought this was a fun scene with the sentiment for Happy Birthday, having this adorable little rhino surrounded by toucans. I hope that you enjoyed this video today. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to check out my channel and consider subscribing. I have lots of other card tutorials and product reviews for you, and I hope you have a very happy day. This is Heather. Bye.